name is David Herlihy. I'm visiting Blanco, Texas today. I live in Boston. I'm a bicycle historian, the author of several books, including this one called The Lost Cyclist. And this is a story about a young man named Frank Lenz from Pittsburgh who tried to go around the world on a bicycle in the 1890s, only to disappear in Turkey. And it's also about a gentleman named William Sachtleben, a contemporary from the St. Louis area, who, along with a buddy, also did a round-the-world bike ride. And the two stories are entwined to some extent. But while I was researching this book, I learned that that UCLA has a collection of papers and negatives relating to this fellow William Sachtleben, and I'm here today with Paul Montague, who happens to be the gentleman who saved all that material. And so, first of all, thank you for having us here. And so, I want to talk to Paul a bit, actually, about ask him to go over that story, because I found it quite fascinating when I first heard about it, and I have said it took me a little while to track you down, but because just to give a little backstory, the collection at UCLA was given, I think, about 30 years ago by a woman named Jean Zakarian, and who sadly passed away 10 years ago, so I wasn't able to talk to her directly. But I knew there was a story, which was that the materials had been saved from a bonfire almost 50 years ago, actually, in the 60s.
Yeah, I was working for Channel 13, and I was doing some photography, and I just happened to be buying some used lumber. They were tearing a house down there. It was almost downtown. And while I was there talking with this fellow trying to make a deal on some of his used lumber, one of his crew threw a box out of a dormer window, look up on the third floor of this house they were tearing down. And when it hit the ground, it broke open, and there were photographs in there and journals. And he grabbed up a handful and threw it in the fire, and they had a fire going there. When they stripped the wallpaper off of these walls before they got the lumber, they just burned it on the spot. And I said, "Are you going to burn all that?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I'd like to have that." I said, "I'll buy it from you." And he said, "All right." And all I had in my pocket was a $20 bill, so I gave him that for it. And I gathered them up and took them with me. And I had looked at a couple of them, and they just looked real interesting to me. There were pictures in there of the slaughter of the Armenians by the Turks, and some pictures of the gold rush, where the gold prospectors were unloading from boats onto the beach and bringing all their equipment ashore, and just seemed like real interesting stuff to me, so I saved it.
You figured it was worthwhile, something of historical value that was destined for a bonfire, and
yeah, it seemed a shame to burn it.
Yeah.
And there were a bunch of glassine negative holders in there, and I never did get a good look at those because I didn't have a viewer.
Right.
And but I saved the whole batch.
So it was old film, basically.
Yeah, and the negatives were real thin.
Yeah, so you couldn't really see those images.
No.
Right, and those, I think, are the images that you saved are in fact what we're showing. I mean, I'm the guest curator of an exhibition that will open very soon at UCLA's Fowler Museum, and they wound up with about 400 of those negatives, and UCLA, you know, just put them in storage basically because they were so fragile and combustible.
Yeah.
But they didn't, you know, when I discovered the existence of this collection, I couldn't see the images either because they were in storage, and I think I tried to put a little pressure on them to scan, you know, the images, and I'm not sure if that's what did it, but at any rate, about a year ago, I heard from the library there that they had done it. They'd scanned them. So that finally gave me a chance to see what these images were. It was very interesting because, it turns out that they were indeed taken with an early Kodak camera by Will Sachtleben, who at the time, so in 1890 when he starts from London, and with his buddy, they both graduated from Washington University in St. Louis, and they were going around the world. The new style bicycle, they called it a safety, as opposed to the old high wheeler. You know, it's just what people had been riding up to that point. You know, they were pretty excited about that invention, as well as this new style film camera. So they decided after they graduated that they'd go around the world with, you know, safety bicycles, basically the modern bike, and a Kodak camera. And so I think from what I read that they took about 1,200 negatives in their 3-year journey. So it turns out after UCLA scanned these 400 or so, they were all taken in the year 1891. So when they left England, they crossed France and Italy, and we don't have those photos. They don't have those negatives. So the negatives start about 6 months into their journey or so in early part of 1891, and at that point they're in Greece. So, and then they run all the way through a year's worth of the journey. So in that time they went from Athens to Uzbekistan. You know, so, but they're wonderful photos. And they cover that stretch of it. And then they spent the second winter on the road there, waiting for, you know, better weather. And then they crossed China. So unfortunately, UCLA doesn't have those negatives either. Now, you know, whether those wound up in the bonfire you were describing, or whether you know they're still out there, we don't know yet. The camera, the Kodak that Sachtleben used to take these images, actually wound up in LA coincidentally at the Natural History Museum, and they're loaning that camera, so visitors will see enlargements, because, you know, originally these were just 3.5-inch diameter photos. We're going to blow them up to 20 so people can get a good look at it. But
I guess that case was about 18 by 30 inches.
And it was pretty chock full of...
It was about 6-8 inches thick.
And just full of papers.
Stuff. And it looked like it had been like a little valise with a handle on top.
Okay.
And it had little metal corners with a knob on the end.
So
like
it was
like a steamer trunk, only smaller.
So it might have been something that also was. I mean, it was old. It was probably his original. At some point, he must have stored his stuff in that.
And it had hasps on it, and like a suitcase.
And that's what this workman just pitched out of the window.
It in the fire, yeah.
Good thing he missed. I mean, wow. And then it spread out on the lawn, and were you just happened to be driving, or you were already there trying to buy lumber?
I was standing there. They had a pile of lumber there, and there were a few guys pulling nails out of boards that they had just brought out. And this guy appears at a dormer. They had already taken the wind out, and he chunks this box out. And
you're down below, and you're seeing this thing fly down and miss the...
And when it hit, it broke open, and all this stuff spilled out.
And wow. And you said, well, if you're not going to keep it...
Yeah, he just started throwing it in the fire.
Oh my gosh, well, you must have been pretty happy to get $20 out of it. I mean, if he was just going to burn it all up. I mean...
Oh, yeah.
Shocking that somebody would... I mean,
well, that was all I had, and... when he said okay, I was so glad to get it. I wanted to hurry up and gather it up and boogie down the road.
Oh, geez, the only thing that, I mean, it's a wonderful story. I just worry about what went in the bonfire, but I
Yeah.
try not to focus on
Yeah.
that. I mean, as I say, the stuff is remarkable. And so he wound up settling in Houston and he lived there, most until his wife died, I think around 1950. And at that point, he went to live with his wife's niece. They didn't have any children. So he left Houston at that point. But I'm guessing that, the house that you saw being torn down might have been, where he was living.
Uh-huh.
I'm guessing that he sold the house and, this case that you saw just, stayed in the attic, I guess, until someone decided they were going to throw it in the bonfire. But, I mean, it's, pretty amazing because, that you saved it. I mean, that was clearly going to go literally up in smoke. And so not only is it the 400 photos from the bicycle trip, but as you noted earlier, that there's a lot of stuff that's interesting to Armenian scholars because Sachtleben would go back to Turkey in 1895 after he'd completed the bike ride. And the purpose of that mission was basically to find this guy Frank Lenz, the guy I wrote about, from Pittsburgh, who had disappeared. And the magazine that had sent him, they figured when they realized something was wrong, they weren't getting his reports, they figured who better to send than another cyclist who had already been there. And so they sent Will Sachtleben over there. And that was the year 1895, and that's when he was trying to find Lenz, or at least what happened to Lenz, but also at the same time, he happened to witness a few massacres, sadly. But he had a different camera at that point. He was no longer using the early Kodak, but I think taking rectangular photos. But some of the photos that you found, or that you saved, relate to that trip. When the massacre, the burials, he was living actually at the home of a missionary in a city called Erzurum, in the eastern part of Turkey, which is near where Lenz had disappeared. So, his main goal was to try to find Lenz, which, he didn't really succeed at doing that. But, it just so happened that he found himself caught up in all this violence and started to record, take photos of that. And also, some of the things you saved, too, that UCLA now has, quite a bit of his manuscripts. He was very interested in the Armenian situation and concerned, and wrote quite a bit in his own handwriting. His analysis of the situation,
and the journals were very interesting that he'd put in there with the photographs.
Right. Well, some of the journals, there were two little ones, really small ones. I don't know if you remember those ones, but there's two really small ones, tiny handwriting. I mean, actually very legible if you have good eyesight. I don't know how you could write that small and still write well, but so two of the really small notebooks were written during the bike ride. One, in fact, details his stay in Athens. So in addition to all the nice photos that you saved, the diary, day by day, of what he was doing in Athens helps us to understand what was going on in a lot of the photos. And, it was very interesting.
The narrative, yeah.
The narrative was fascinating. Yeah. And then there's a second one that's related to the bike trip, which, because they were numbered, and again, who knows how much some of this may have gone up in the bonfire, but at this point, UCLA just has two of, I think, we know from the numbering that there were at least 20 or so, little journals that he was keeping while doing the bike ride. So two of those have survived for sure.
Yeah.
But you actually didn't have a very clear idea who this guy Will Sachtleben was, did you?
I didn't know a thing about him.
Yeah. I mean, in those days too, nowadays you can Google something and you find pretty quickly something about, I'm assuming you didn't have a whole lot of free time back then. You had a family, you had a job, you didn't have time to spend, countless hours as it would have taken back then.
Well, when I started reading the journals, I thought, well, this guy must be a reporter or a writer.
Well, he was.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he was definitely aspiring to be that. I think that's what he envisioned for his I think he actually wanted to be where the action was.
Yeah.
You know, I know at one point he wanted to go to the Spanish-American War. You know, all this is sort of in the same time period.
Yeah.
He wanted to be. I think he was offered. Yeah, because became quite famous. You know, looking for lands and his reports from Turkey, and I think he was looking to. I know at one point he had actually signed up for an expedition to the North Pole.
Wow.
I found the papers at the Library of Congress, and the organizer actually got quite upset at Will Sachtleben because at the last minute he said, "No, I'm sorry, my wife won't let me," or my fiance, I think he said. And the organizer was he said, "Listen, we talked about this, and you know, you agreed that nothing was going to stop you, you know."
Yeah.
So the idea that a woman got in the way, he didn't like that. But I guess, you know, the future wife May made it clear, you know, it was her, the North Pole, and that's when he settled down.
I've always been a history buff, and stuff like that has always fascinated me.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's just an amazing story how you. I mean, it's amazing to think how all of that could have just gone up in smoke if you hadn't had the inclination to step in. And I mean, I guess that's kind of good luck on some level, but it also, you know, I mean, you recognize it was a piece of history and
Yeah.
worth saving, and it cost you $20, but
well worth it.
well worth it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
geez.
No, I know UCLA would gladly reimburse you. I'm sure the $20 if you want to put in a claim for it. But
I just think the whole story is fascinating.